Lonnie Rae, and I'm here to talk to you about the future of medicine. Johns Hopkins University says that each year, over 250,000 people die from medical error. This includes medication error and missed or delayed diagnosis. And what this means is that medical error is the third leading cause of death in the United States. This is Boston Medical Center. It's a leading healthcare center in the United States. It's where I went to medical school. When I was training, I was in a satellite hospital. And I had a patient come in, partially paralyzed, very anxious, and then he slipped into being unconscious. There was a test that we could have run that would have taken a week to get back. We called all around the area to the hospitals trying to find out this patient's history. There was an on-the-fly test that was done by one of the residents that came back positive. But by the time we found this out, this patient was in the ICU on a respirator. And there was information in his history that would have made his care better, faster, and cheaper. This is a leading healthcare center in the United States, in the healthcare capital of our country. And we didn't have access to this patient's history. So these stories, they represent where we are now. And what I'm here to talk to you about is what is going to change and what the future looks like. In the past, we had intuition-based medicine. This is the four humors. You have a little too much blood, a little too much bile, so we bled you with leeches and we made you vomit. Now we have what's called evidence-based medicine, which means that someone with a lot of training looks at your record, looks through your history, talks to you, gets your history. And then they find patterns, and then they look through research, and they try and figure out what protocols to use and how to treat you. In the future, this will be done by computer algorithms, looking at your personal history. I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to give you this talk today because last week I had a really bad cough and lost my voice. I couldn't call my primary care doctor, so I went to urgent care. And I had a chest x-ray and was given some medicine. But because there were rotating doctors, I never got my results back. And I had a friend try calling my physician, but the record wouldn't transfer and she couldn't see my x-ray. I never found out what happened. And this is just one symptom of the problem today. And it's one reason why we haven't been able to optimize precision algorithm-based medicine. Over 83% of health providers today have electronic medical records. And the point of this was that you would have an electronic medical record that you could share with everyone and that everyone would have access to, and that we could use that to help diagnose and treat you. But only 14% of doctors are able to share this record with the full care team. This is something called a structured integration. What this means is that when someone wants to share data from a hospital, they go into the location and they have an engineer map field 1 to field A, field 2 to field B, field 3 to field C, manually. And it takes roughly 2 months and $100,000, and then it's subject to perpetual maintenance. And every time you upgrade, it breaks. And if the doctor enters data differently than the doctor sitting next to him, it breaks the data model, and a human has to interpret it. And when that data is transferred, only 20% of the record is transferred. So this is what we call the structured data, things with a field A, field B, field C. This is your medication list, your lab values, your diagnosis list. But what's not included is the entire physician history and notes, all of the evidence that is critical to your care. And we've spent $48 billion in tax money creating these systems and fixing them. And that's just one way in which we're spending more money and getting less than mediocre care. This graph shows healthcare spending on the x-axis and life expectancy on the y. Other developed nations are over there. So you see Japan and Korea with relatively high life expectancy and relatively low healthcare spending, and Western Europe spending a little bit more and getting a few more years. And then you see us. I'm going to tell you a story about a drug called Vioxx. Vioxx was a drug that was developed for arthritis, and we put it on the market to help our elderly patients with pain management, aches and pains, feeling a little creaky. But what we found is that all of a sudden, people were having more heart attacks. So that's fine, right? We caught it, we found out, we took it off the market, right? Kind of. We found out after 5 years, after 60,000 people died. All right, so just one drug, right? Really bad drug, okay? Actually, every single year we have 2.2 million adverse drug events, serious adverse drug events. And what that means is that 1 in 5 of you will have a serious adverse drug event. Every year, 2.8 billion prescriptions are written. And we don't have the data set to tell how those drugs are interacting with one another, with the foods you eat, grapefruit juice, the drugs you're taking over the counter, or what else you're taking from a different doctor. It is not available. That's not even counting things like headache or dizziness, stomach pains that you might have for years. We just add a second drug or a seventh drug to take care of the side effects. There are 3 core problems and reasons why we don't have a system like this in our country today. Moving HIPAA data is really hard. So we need systems that are able to move this easily and simply. And analysis is really difficult when you don't have accessible data. So we need liberated data for analysis. Preventing breaches is hard, and we need to be realistic and create advancements in the security of our systems. This is what we call integration technology. What we do at Metal is we take the raw provider EMR data, this is what your doctor types into their notes, and we write printer drivers that allow them to print to machine-readable formats. We also have output that works with the existing systems today. And what this enables is big data analytics. We're able to take a record like this one, sample record. This is a patient with diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, and turn it into something like this. These are diseases, disorders, signs, symptoms, procedures that this patient has had, which a computer can now read. And we're able to translate them to things like list of genetic tests that should be done for a patient like this one. And why this is important for this patient is that for diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, these patients are typically put on a therapy called CHOP, or CHOP plus rituximab. And there's a certain number of these patients that don't respond to this therapy, and typically they're the patients with those first genetic mutations on the list. So what we're able to do is provide a list of genetic tests or other tests that the physician should have access to determine if this patient should be put on a different therapy. Every time you take a genetic sequence, there are on average 6 million mutations in that sequence. And the majority of these are something we call variants of unknown significance, meaning we just don't know. It's only when we have this data set available with the clinical data that we will start to understand what our genetic code means. What we do is we make it very easy to export full medical records to cloud-based databases. We run analytics on them, and then we make it simple to pick which patients we should do this for. I'm going to say a word about security because you may have heard about breaches commonly or in the healthcare system. Most of these breaches are taking place on private servers where a single encryption key is being used to store all of your records. We do this a bit differently. Every single record has its own individual encryption key stored on a system that's kind of like blockchain but private. And we have a security system called rate lock. Rate lock monitors the rate of data access of a cloud-based system and then tells us if that rate changes so that we can lock down and reboot the whole system again with new keys. So now we get the fun part. We'll talk about what the future looks like. It's kind of a joke, but someday you'll go into a healthcare system, a healthcare location, and we'll be able to look at your past history, we'll run a couple tests, we'll know what's wrong, and we'll know how to treat you. One thing that is critical to this is that our databases have to be able to talk to one another in the same language. For the first time in our country, there is a modern API for healthcare, and it's called FHIR. F-H-I-R, Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources. It's the first time we have an API that looks like what we use in Silicon Valley. And the beautiful part is that there's open source apps being developed for this by the folks at Harvard, Cedars-Sinai, and Johns Hopkins, and more, as well as stuff we're developing. And all the databases that are on FHIR can talk to one another. And so what this enables is for us to look at your unique fingerprint, to look at how you look and how you're different and the same and treat you individually. And the cost for this data is going down. So in 2001, it was over $100 million to sequence your genome, and now it's under 1,000. So this data is becoming available, will become available. What this means is that instead of saying, wow, okay, we're gonna match a pattern for this patient has diabetes, we're gonna put them on a drug, and that drug works for 20% of patients, we're able to say Mary should have drug A, and Bob should have drug B, and Kathy should have drug C. And for patients with cancer, we're able to look at their unique genetic mutation and identify the drug that is going to be best for them. Or we're able to take a sample of their cancer and then find out from an animal model which drug is going to be best for their specific cancer. And there's even companies, this company is Emulate, they're over at Cedars-Sinai, they're putting your own cells in chips. They're eliminating animal testing so that you can test and find out what's going to work for your diabetes, your cancer, your illness, your health. And someday, this is going to be on your cell phone. And it's going to be on the back of your insurance card. And you're going to know who you saw and how to reach them and what they said about you. And if there's one thing that I want you to take away from this talk today, it's that the accessibility of this data is what is going to take us from here to here. Thank you.